It is a universally acknowledged truth that a king in possession of a sprawling kingdom must be in want of a migraine. King Lazarus Vance, however, was currently in want of a nap, a very large plate of bacon, and for the Archduke of Fenwood to stop talking about tariffs on imported lumber. The Archduke had been going for 40 minutes. Lazarus knew this because he had been counting the dust motes drifting through the stained glass light above the council table, and he was up to 312. The window depicted his great-grandfather looking constipated, or possibly heroic. The artisan had not been gifted with subtlety. And Lazarus was halfway through a fantasy about throwing his crown like a discus clean through it when the doors at the far end of the council chamber opened. A servant slipped in. Quiet, efficient. Brown hair pinned back with no fuss. She carried a tray of water pitchers and moved along the far wall with a kind of practiced invisibility that came from years of learning exactly how much space she was allowed to take up. Clara Meadows. He knew her name. He should not have known her name. There were 400 servants in this palace, and Lazarus could name perhaps 12. But 3 weeks ago, he had been walking the East Corridor, a route he had no reason to take, a fact he preferred not to examine, and he had heard her voice drifting from behind the half-open door of the linen closet. She'd been talking to another maid. The other maid had been complaining about Lord Bromwell's new portrait, the one that hung in the South Gallery, the one in which the jowly lord had been painted astride a horse with the expression of a man who had just been told something shocking about his own finances. "It's not that bad," the other maid had said, and Clara Meadows, without looking up from the sheets she was folding, had replied, "The horse looks embarrassed." That was it. 4 words. Lazarus had stopped walking. He had stood in the corridor like a man who had walked into a door, replayed the sentence in his head, and then laughed so suddenly and so loudly that both maids had gone silent, and he'd had to walk away very quickly before they opened the door. The horse looks embarrassed. It was the single funniest thing anyone had said in this palace in a decade. And she'd said it to no one, about nothing, while folding sheets. Since then, and he was aware of how this sounded, even inside his own head, he had found reasons. The East Corridor was scenic. The West Wing kitchens made better coffee. The staff dining hall was a shortcut to the armory if you went the long way. He had become, without quite admitting it, a man who arranged his day around the possibility of overhearing a laundry maid. The part of him that was less interested in self-deception, the part that noticed exits before he sat down, that had already catalogued every person in this room by threat level, that tracked the particular way she smelled of clean linen and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender, was entirely untroubled by this. That part of him had decided she was important approximately 11 seconds after the horse comment, and had not wavered since. Magnificent, that deeper layer of his mind supplied, with the calm certainty of someone admiring their own reflection. She has arrived. The room improves. Lazarus told the smug, self-satisfied corner of his brain to be quiet, and watched Clara set a pitcher down beside Lord Bromwell, who did not look up, did not pause his side conversation, did not register her existence in any way. She didn't flinch. She simply moved to the next seat with the efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting to be seen. Every other servant in this palace performed. When Lazarus walked a corridor, maids curtsied so deep they nearly toppled. Footmen pressed themselves against walls. Kitchen staff suddenly found fascinating things to study on their own shoes. The whole palace became a theater of deference the moment his shadow appeared. Clara didn't. She kept working. Not with defiance, there was nothing pointed about it. She simply continued whatever she was doing with the focus of someone who had a job and intended to do it, king or no king. The first time he'd passed her in a hallway after the horse comment, he'd slowed deliberately, not stopping, but adjustable, available. And she had glanced up, met his eyes for exactly 1 second, and then gone back to polishing a banister. 1 second. He'd been thinking about that 1 second for 2 weeks. Now, in the council chamber, she reached the head of the table. His end. He watched her pour water into his goblet with steady hands, her gaze fixed on the task. She was close enough that he caught the lavender again, layered over something warmer, Bread dough, maybe. Had she been in the kitchens? She bakes, the satisfied part of his mind noted, filing this information away with the reverence of a scholar cataloging a rare text. She bakes, and she is funny, and she smells extraordinary, and she is right there. We should say something memorable. We are very good at words. Lazarus opened his mouth to say something, anything, a thank you at minimum. But Clara was already moving away, the pitcher in hand, her eyes straight ahead. As she passed behind his chair, her sleeve brushed his shoulder. The lightest possible contact, an accident of proximity. Neither of them moved faster afterward, but neither of them breathed either. She slipped back out through the doors. The council chamber felt duller. Your Majesty? The Archduke was staring at him with the pinched expression of a man whose monologue had been interrupted by royal inattention. The tariff proposals? Yes, Lazarus said, having heard nothing. Continue. The Archduke continued. Lazarus resumed counting dust motes. He was up to 347 when the world tilted sideways. The jolt came without warning, sharp, electric, a physical sensation of tripping, a phantom lurch in his stomach, and the distinct, agonizing crack of a ceramic plate shattering on a stone floor. He flinched so hard his crown slid sideways over one eye. The Archduke paused, his mouth a perfect O of offended surprise. Interesting, the smug part of his mind observed, entirely unbothered. Something has happened. To us, presumably. Things are always happening to us. Your Majesty? The Archduke ventured. Lazarus straightened the crown. His heart was thumping a strange, panicked rhythm that wasn't his own. Apologies, Archduke. A momentary spasm. Then came the second wave. Not a jolt, but a flood. A thick, syrupy wave of mortification, so profound it made his ears burn. It was followed by the sting of unshed tears and the frantic, looping thought, not again, please not Mrs. Croft. She'll take it from my wages. I can't afford. The thought was so specific, so deeply feminine and terrified that Lazarus felt his own throat tighten. And then, layered underneath the panic, an observation so dry it cut through everything. The plate had little gold birds on it, hand-painted, each bird a slightly different shade of pretentious. He almost laughed. In the middle of his own psychic crisis, he almost laughed at someone else's private joke. He knew, instantly and completely, who it was. Of course, his wolf mind purred, radiating satisfaction like a cat in a sunbeam. Of course it is her. Who else would it be? The universe has excellent taste. A low growl built in his chest, purely instinctual, a response to the distress pouring into him from Clara. He swallowed it, gripping the arms of his silver throne. His palms were slick with sweat that smelled faintly of fear and lemon polish. As you were saying, Archduke, Lazarus managed, the lumber. But a new sensation was layering over the mortification, a dull, throbbing ache in the arches of both feet, the kind that comes from 10 hours upright on unforgiving stone. It was not his pain, but he felt it as if it were. And underneath it, the quiet, devastating thought, at least the birds were ugly. Clara Meadows stared at the shattered remains of the Duchess of Everleigh's favorite breakfast plate and considered her options. They were in order. 1. Flee the country. 2. Become a hermit in the mountains. 3. Learn to make pottery and replace the plate before anyone noticed. Or 4. Accept that she was about to lose a month's wages over a piece of ceramic that someone's grandmother had apparently considered art. She went with option 5. Kneel and start picking up the pieces while her heart tried to escape through her ribcage. The plate had been hand-painted with little gold birds, each one slightly different. Each one, Clara had always privately thought, wearing the expression of a sparrow who had just been told it was now a decorative motif and was not happy about it. The plate was worth more than everything Clara owned, including Clara. She calculated. A month's wages minimum, possibly 6 weeks if Mrs. Croft was in a mood, and Mrs. Croft was always in a mood. Mrs. Croft had been born in a mood. The woman's displeasure could curdle milk from 3 rooms away, and had once made a footman cry so hard he'd walked into a suit of armor. Clara's fingers trembled as she gathered the shards. Her left shoe, the one with the sole that was separating like a couple who had given up on counseling, had caught on the loose floorboard. The one she knew was there. The one she navigated around twice a day. The one that had chosen today, of all days, to remind her that the universe had a sense of humor, and it was pointed squarely at her. She didn't register the approach of the witch until a shadow fell over her. The woman was ancient, her face a road map of wrinkles, wearing the dark robes of a hedge mage, the kind the palace tolerated for minor charms. The witch looked from Clara's panicked face to the broken plate, then back again. A slow, strange smile. "A moment of imbalance," the witch rasped. "It can topple an empire." Clara, too mortified to engage with cryptic elderly women, continued picking up porcelain. The witch's gaze drifted upward, toward the ceiling, as if she could see through stone and timber to the council chamber above. "That one has been circling you for weeks, girl. Like a very large, very confused bird of prey who's forgotten how to land." She chuckled. "Let's see what happens when he catches." She made a small, intricate gesture in the air. A shimmer of ozone and burnt sugar hung in the corridor for a second before vanishing. Clara, focused on a particularly sharp piece of sparrow, didn't notice. She was too busy calculating how many meals she'd have to skip. The answer, her brain supplied with grim efficiency, was all of them. Back in the council chamber, the ache in Lazarus's feet was now accompanied by a gnawing emptiness in his stomach. Not the noble hunger of a missed meal, the hollow, acidic craving of a body running on fumes. He could taste the ghost of a cheap biscuit on his tongue. A sugared sparrow, the kind the kitchen staff were given on long shifts. He hadn't eaten one since he was a boy, sneaking into the kitchens. And then, entirely unbidden, an observation that was not his. Lord Desmond has arranged his hair to look effortless. It has taken him at least 40 minutes. You can tell because the left side is slightly higher than the right, which means he ran out of whatever he puts in it and had to improvise. The man is a monument to wasted effort. Lazarus choked. "Your Majesty, are you well?" Gregor Thorne, his beta, leaned in from the adjacent chair, his face etched with concern. "I'm fine," Lazarus lied. Another wave hit, exhaustion so profound it was geological, the kind that had settled into bones like sediment. His eyelids turned to lead. The Archduke's voice became a distant buzz, and underneath it all, a current of loneliness so vast and quiet it made his chest ache. The feeling of being perpetually surrounded by people, but never truly seen. He knew that feeling. He'd had a version of it his entire life. The knowledge that every interaction was filtered through the crown, that no one in any room was ever just talking to him. But this version was different. His was loneliness at the top. Hers was loneliness at the bottom. And the bottom, he was discovering, was so much worse. Because at the bottom, you didn't even get the cold comfort of knowing people were pretending. "This is unacceptable," his wolf mind declared, not with alarm, but with the offended dignity of someone who has discovered their favorite restaurant has closed. She is ours to notice. She should not feel unnoticed. This is a failure of the universe, and we will be filing a complaint. Lazarus shoved himself to his feet. The scrape of the throne's legs echoed in the sudden silence. "This meeting is adjourned," he bit out. He strode from the room, his long legs unsteady. Each step a symphony of someone else's aches. He had to find the source of this. The curse, the bond, whatever it was. But underneath that urgency, a quieter truth. He had been looking for reasons to find her for 3 weeks. Now he had one he couldn't ignore. The first day was a lesson in abject misery. Lazarus woke feeling trampled, despite his own body being perfectly rested. He was inhabited by the ghost of someone else's fatigue. His valet Finn tried to dress him in his formal tunic. Lazarus flinched when the fabric brushed his shoulders. Phantom ache in muscles strained from scrubbing floors. "Just the plain one today, Finn," he mumbled. He caught his reflection. The king of the Northern Ridge Pack looked haunted. faint, shadowy bruises under his eyes that weren't his. Still magnificent, his wolf mind observed, adjusting its assessment with the flexibility of a truly committed narcissist. Haunted is a good look on us. Brooding. The poets will write about this. He spent the morning in his study trying to review trade agreements, but Clara's reality kept bleeding through. A sharp, stabbing pain in his right wrist, carpal tunnel from wringing out heavy laundry, the dull throb of a hunger headache behind his eyes, and her thoughts, arriving without context like postcards from a stranger. The third-floor chandelier has 412 crystals. I know because I've cleaned each one individually and had a personal relationship with every single piece of dust on them. And later, Lord Bromwell walks as though he is being followed by an invisible brass band, playing music only he can hear. The tempo is stately. He is very pleased with it. Lazarus found himself laughing alone in his study, then immediately sobered by a wave of her exhaustion so heavy it pinned him to his chair. On impulse, he slammed the bell on his desk. A footman appeared. "Bring me a tray from the staff kitchen," Lazarus commanded. "Whatever they're having. And a whole tin of sugared sparrow biscuits." The footman's eyes widened, but he bowed and scurried away. When the food arrived, thin, watery stew and a hunk of dry bread, Lazarus stared at it, took a bite. Bland, joyless. And yet, the moment it hit his tongue, a wave of desperate relief washed through him from Clara. The satisfaction was so immediate, so primal, it was startling. He devoured the stew, tore into the biscuits, cloyingly sweet, tasting of chemicals and cheap jam. But through the bond, a surge of pure, unadulterated pleasure, the fierce joy of a small comfort in a hard world. He finished the last crumb and leaned back, breathing hard. He had helped her. He didn't know how. She was somewhere in the castle, unaware of the connection, but for a moment, he had made her feel better. Naturally, his wolf mind noted, stretching with satisfaction. We provide. It is what we do. She will be very impressed when she finds out. They always are. She doesn't know, Lazarus muttered. A temporary administrative oversight. She will know, and then she will be impressed. Clara Meadows felt the warmth of the stew spread through her stomach and almost wept with relief. She'd been cleaning the grand ballroom, her stomach a tight, angry knot. Then Mrs. Croft had appeared with a tray. The king commanded it, the housekeeper had said, baffled. A hot meal for every servant on duty, immediately. Clara ate quickly, hiding in an alcove behind a tapestry. The food tasted like heaven. For the first time all day, the knot of anxiety loosened. As she bit into a sugared sparrow biscuit, something strange happened. A warmth bloomed in her chest that had nothing to do with the food. A flicker of awareness, like being watched from a great distance. Not threatening, almost pleased. She dismissed it, exhaustion playing tricks. But she also thought, very quietly, this is the second strange thing this week. The first was the king looking at me during the council session as if I'd said something extraordinary when I hadn't said anything at all. She thought about that 1 second of eye contact in the hallway 2 weeks ago. How she'd made herself look away because looking at King Lazarus Vance for longer than 1 second was like looking at the sun. Technically survivable, but inadvisable for someone in her tax bracket. She thought about the way he'd slowed when he'd passed her, as if he'd wanted to stop. As if he'd wanted her to look up. She hadn't, because she wasn't stupid. And because the part of her that noticed things, the part that had cataloged that his eyes were the color of old whiskey, and that he had a small scar on his left jaw, and that when he was bored in meetings his right thumb tapped a pattern on the armrest that was almost, but not quite, a waltz. That part of her needed to be kept under very strict supervision. He is the king, she reminded herself firmly. You are a person who cleans his chandeliers. These are not overlapping social circles. She finished the biscuit and went back to work. Day 2 brought the exquisite agony of a poorly fitted shoe. Lazarus was reviewing troop movements when a sharp, pinching pain erupted in his left little toe. He kicked his leg out from under the table. The general froze. Carry on, Lazarus gritted out. Later, the burn of cleaning chemicals on phantom hands, soot in a throat that hadn't been near a fireplace. And through it all, Clara's internal observations, arriving like dispatches from the world's driest correspondent. The Duchess of Everleigh has redecorated her parlor again. The color scheme can only be described as aggressive peach. The curtains match the wallpaper, match the cushions, match the Duchess's complexion when she drinks too much sherry. It is a symphony in one note, and that note is unfortunate. He laughed into his paperwork, then felt her feet ache, her back seize, and her stomach growl, and stopped laughing. By day 3, the sympathy had curdled into rage, not at Clara, at himself. He was in a council meeting, half listening to Lord Desmond drone about tradition, when he felt Clara's heart-pounding panic. She'd lost a silver button from a duke's waistcoat. She was on her hands and knees somewhere, breath coming in short, terrified gasps. The fear of being accused of theft was a cold serpent in his gut. His gut. Her fear. He slammed his hand on the table. The crack silenced the chamber. He stood, chair scraping backward. "There is a problem," he said, and walked out. His feet carried him down corridors he rarely used, past storerooms and laundry chutes, into the beating, thankless heart of the palace. He found her in the servants' dining hall, a grim, windowless room. She was sitting alone at a scarred table, staring at something cold and congealed. Hadn't touched it. Face pale, shoulders slumped. He felt a fresh wave of her despair, coupled with the sting of a reprimand from Mrs. Croft. He strode to her table. She didn't look up until his shadow fell across her. She started, eyes widening. They were a soft brown, and right now, they were filled with weariness that went bone deep. And then, because she was Clara, because she could not help it, a thought slipped through the bond. The king is in the servants' hall. He looks like he hasn't slept. His hair is doing something architectural. I think he may be lost. Lazarus had to physically fight down a smile. "You," he said, rougher than intended. "You feel this every day?" Her eyes darted around the room. "Your Majesty?" "This," he gestured at her, at the room. "The exhaustion, the hunger, the feeling that your bones are about to turn to dust. You feel this daily?" A flicker of confusion. She looked at her hands, then back at him. "Most servants do, Your Majesty," she said softly. "It is the nature of the work." The quiet acceptance in her voice broke something in him. The rage boiled over, directed squarely at himself. He was the king. This was his house. These were his people. He had walked past them every day, mind on politics, and never once seen the desperation in their eyes. He looked at Clara Meadows, at the smudges of dirt on her cheek, and felt the truth like a blow. But he also felt something else through the bond, something she was trying very hard to suppress. A flicker of awareness, concern, not for herself, for him. She was looking at the shadows under his eyes and thinking, he looks terrible, worse than yesterday, worse than the day before. Something is wrong with him and no one seems to have noticed. She was worried about him. The king who had just barged into her dining hall looking unhinged. She was worried about him. His wolf mind, for once, had nothing smug to say. Just a quiet, fierce pulse of, this one, this one, this one, this one. He turned on his heel and left, his mind a whirlwind. He didn't see Clara's face as she watched him go, the bewildered shock, and underneath it, the thing she would absolutely not allow herself to name. He didn't sleep. He stormed into the royal archives, Gregor trailing him, and pulled out employment ledgers, budget accounts, royal decrees. The phantom aches intensified with every page. Clara's shoulders burning from polishing, a splinter in her thumb, the gnawing anxiety about her sister's tuition. "Lazarus, what is going on?" Gregor cornered him between tax records and a dusty bust. "You look like you've been wrestling bears. You've insulted the Archduke, terrified the council, and ordered enough sugared sparrow biscuits to feed an army." Lazarus ran a hand through his hair. "I am connected to someone, Gregor. A curse. I feel what she feels." "You're feeling the physical state of an Omega maid?" Omegas were the smallest wolves, lighter boned, quicker, often overlooked in a world that measured worth by size. Clara's wolf, if she even shifted anymore, would be barely knee-height to his. And emotional, and, he hesitated, her thoughts, some of them, the ones that are loudest. He did not mention that the loud ones were mostly devastating observations about the palace's decor and inhabitants. That felt private. Which maid? Lazarus was quiet for a moment. Clara Meadows. Gregor's eyebrow rose, the one that meant he had noticed something Lazarus wished he hadn't. The maid you've been taking the scenic route past for the last 3 weeks? I have not been the East Corridor, Lazarus. You have been walking the East Corridor. You hate the East Corridor. You once called it a monument to my great-uncle's poor taste in wallpaper. We have been noticed, his wolf mind observed, preening. Our devotion is the stuff of legend. Bards will sing of the East Corridor. I'm changing it, Lazarus said, slamming a ledger shut. All of it. The hours, the wages, the food, everything. The first decree was issued at dawn. Mandatory rest periods. 8-hour shifts, down from 12. 2 rest days per week. 3 hot meals daily for all staff, identical quality to the royal table. Lord Desmond Croft swept into the throne room, velvet robes flapping like angry bat wings. This is madness, an affront to tradition. Lazarus was on his throne, running on 47 minutes of sleep. Clara had been plagued by nightmares about the broken plate, and through the bond he'd experienced every gold sparrow in shattered detail. He felt her anxiety spike as Desmond entered the room. A phantom echo of old fear. Desmond's sister was her boss. This man had power over her life. A growl surfaced, quiet, but enough to make Desmond halt. And Lazarus felt something he didn't expect, a sharp flare from Clara. Not fear this time. Indignation. Hot, fierce anger on his behalf. She'd heard about the confrontation through the staff grapevine. Of course she had. The servant network was faster than any courier. And she thought Desmond was being unfair. To the king. To her king. The possessive warmth of that thought, her king, hit Lazarus like a physical blow. Get out, he said softly. Desmond, for the first time in his life, looked afraid. He bowed and retreated. The changes rippled through the palace. Suspicion gave way to cautious hope, then to something warmer. Clara found herself with a free afternoon, so alien she didn't know what to do with it. She ended up in the royal library, a place she usually only entered to dust. She ran her hand over leather-bound books, the scent of old paper a balm. In his study, Lazarus felt her contentment flow into him, calm, cool, like a mountain spring. He smiled, a real one. She is reading, his wolf mind reported with immense satisfaction. She is content. We have done this. We are magnificent providers. Truly, history will remember us as the king who invented the concept of a day off. You're welcome, civilization. The next weeks passed in a blur of reform and silent communion. They didn't speak directly, but through the bond, Lazarus learned the landscape of her mind. She was fiercely intelligent. She had a dry wit she kept hidden from the world. She missed her mother, who had taught her the constellations. She was saving every coin for a cottage with a garden and a window facing the sunrise. And she noticed everything. Everything. The way the cook's assistant was sweet on the head gardener, but too shy to say so. The way old Lord Pemberton's left hand shook when he thought no one was watching. The way the west wing smelled of damp stone on rainy days, in a pattern that suggested a leak 3 floors up that nobody had found yet. She saw the palace with a clarity that was almost painful. And she saw him. Flashes of awareness that leaked through the bond before she could suppress them. The way he held his pen. The scar on his jaw. The way his voice carried through stone walls when he laughed, which was not often enough. He was falling for a woman he'd barely spoken to, and it was the most terrifying thing he'd ever experienced, because he could feel, beneath all her sharp observations and wry thoughts, the one thing she kept locked in the deepest part of herself, the conviction that none of this was real, that whatever the king was doing, it had nothing to do with her. that wanting something this far above her reach was the most dangerous kind of foolishness. One evening, he was walking in the gardens. Night-blooming jasmine, cool air. He felt a sudden spike of her awareness. Not a thought, but a feeling. He looked up. In a high window of the east wing, a silhouette, Clara, watching him. And through the bond, a wave of longing so intense it stopped his breath. The feeling of seeing something beautiful and impossible and knowing it was not yours to want. His wolf mind, for once, was not smug. It was very still and very certain. He felt her blush, phantom heat on his own cheeks, as she realized she'd been caught. She jerked back from the window and vanished. Lazarus stood in the garden, his world tilting. He had felt her pain, her exhaustion, her quiet sorrows. Now he had felt her heart, and underneath his own thundering pulse, a thought that was entirely his. She's wrong. She's wrong about all of it, and I am going to spend however long it takes proving it. Their first real conversation happened by accident, or what Lazarus told himself was accident, despite the fact that he had checked the library 3 times that day. She was in the east alcove, tucked into a window seat with a book on agricultural reform in the southern valleys. He felt her before he saw her, a hum of deep, focused contentment, the particular quality of a mind absorbed in something interesting. He came around the corner and there she was, her shoes off, her feet tucked under her, completely engrossed. She looked up. He stopped. For a moment they just looked at each other, and it was the hallway all over again, 1 second stretching into something elastic and warm, except this time neither of them looked away. "Your Majesty," she said, closing the book on her finger to hold the page. Not standing, not curtsying, just looking at him. "You're reading about crop rotation," he said, because apparently the part of his brain responsible for impressive conversation had taken the day off. "The chapter on soil acidity is surprisingly gripping." She paused. "Your southern territories have a drainage problem. The book says it's been ongoing for 40 years, which means roughly 4 kings have ignored it. 5. My great-uncle doesn't count. He was technically regent. 5 kings have ignored a drainage problem that is costing your agricultural output approximately 12% per annum." He leaned against the bookshelf. Through the bond, he could feel her heart rate increase. Not fear, something warmer, and the fierce internal effort to keep her voice steady. He could also feel a thought she was trying very hard to suppress. He is leaning against a bookshelf. The bookshelf is not structurally significant. Why does it look structurally significant when he leans on it? "You've calculated the output loss," he said. "The book calculated it. I just noticed no one had done anything about it." She met his eyes again. "It seems to be a theme." The quiet challenge in her voice, not angry, not disrespectful, just honest, landed like a tuning fork struck against bone. She was not talking about drainage anymore. "It does seem to be a theme," he agreed. "I'm working on it." "The drainage or the general negligence?" "Yes." She almost smiled. He felt it through the bond, the shape of the smile she didn't let reach her face, the warmth behind it, and the immediate, practiced suppression. She pressed it down like someone folding a letter they weren't ready to send. "I should go," she said, uncurling from the window seat. She put her shoes back on, the terrible ones, the ones with the separating sole that he could feel pinching her every step, and stood. She was shorter than he expected. He'd only ever seen her at a distance, moving through corridors with the purposeful stride of someone covering ground. Up close, the top of her head reached his chin. She moved to pass him. The alcove was narrow. For 2 steps, they were close enough that he could have counted her eyelashes. The lavender and bread scent wrapped around him, and his wolf mind went absolutely incandescent with smugness. And through the bond, he caught her sensory impression of him. Old leather, wood smoke, and something underneath like cold stone after rain. She was cataloging it the way she cataloged everything, filing it under information she had no business possessing. "He smells like the library would smell if the library were a person. This is an unhelpful observation. File it away. Burn the file." She stopped. They were very close. Her hand was near his. His chin was above her head. If he dipped his face and she lifted hers, the distance between them would be nothing at all. He felt the thought cross her mind at the same moment it crossed his. A perfect, terrifying synchronicity through the bond. Neither of them moved. The air in the alcove became something solid. Then she took a breath, and her fingers brushed his knuckles as she stepped past. Not an accident. Light as a question she wasn't ready to ask out loud. Neither of them acknowledged it. But through the bond, he felt a bloom of warmth from her that she would spend the rest of the day pretending didn't exist. She touched us, his wolf mind announced, as if reporting the discovery of a new continent. Of her own volition, deliberately. This is unprecedented. We are clearly irresistible. The bookshelf was a masterstroke. I didn't plan the bookshelf, Lazarus muttered to himself after she'd gone. The bookshelf planned itself, because even furniture recognizes our greatness. The council challenge came 3 days later. Emboldened by Desmond's backroom grumbling, the nobles formally demanded Lazarus justify the reforms. Special session. Direct challenge to his authority. Lazarus walked into the chamber feeling Clara's nervous energy beneath his skin. She was on a mandated rest day, visiting her sister in the village, but he could feel her anxiety for him across the miles, a low, persistent hum. He stood before the assembled nobles. Lord Bromwell, jowly and affronted, stood to speak. Your Majesty, we ask you to reconsider. The treasury is not infinite. You are upsetting a balance maintained for generations. Lazarus let the silence stretch. He looked at their stern faces. The old Lazarus would have met this with arrogance and fury, but the man standing before them now knew the precise ache of a charwoman's knees. He let the mask fall. You speak of balance, he began. His voice was quiet. No boom, no command. Just wait. For years I believed that balance meant preserving our traditions. I believed my duty was to be strong, decisive, and distant. I believed empathy was weakness. He paused. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air. I was a king who lived in a palace I did not truly see. I was served by people whose names I barely knew. I presided over a system that I benefited from without ever counting the cost to those who upheld it. His gaze swept the room. The balance you speak of, Lord Bromwell, was the balance of my comfort on the scales of their exhaustion. It was not balance. It was cruelty performed through neglect. Miles away, Clara had stopped walking. She was standing in the middle of a village road, her hand pressed to her chest, feeling the raw, painful honesty pouring through the bond. Her sister was asking her what was wrong. She couldn't answer. She was too busy silently weeping for a man she barely knew, who was standing in front of his entire court and admitting he had failed. A curse was placed on me, Lazarus continued. I will not say by whom. It was meant to shame me. Instead, it opened my eyes. For the past month, I have felt the reality of life in this palace. I have felt the hunger, the pain, the quiet despair of being invisible. His voice dropped. It has broken my heart. He looked at Gregor, whose eyes were shining. These reforms are restitution. They are the first step in correcting a generational wrong. They are not an expense. They are an investment in the people, who are the true foundation of this kingdom. If you call that weakness, then I have never been prouder to be weak. Silence. Then Gregor began to clap. Slow, deliberate. Another lord joined. Then another. Soon the chamber was filled with applause. Through the bond, Lazarus felt Clara's tears, not of sadness, but of fierce, aching pride, and they were the only benediction he needed. Desmond cornered him 2 days later, the throne room, ostensibly about the ritual of airing. The pack sees a king who has been softened, Desmond sneered. He stepped closer. I know about the curse, Lazarus. Shackled to some Omega's pathetic whims. Your father would be ashamed. The mention of his father landed like a surgical strike. The old wound, the fear of never measuring up, tore open. And in that moment, through the bond, an echo from Clara. Not the same wound, but it rhymed. Her quiet certainty that she was fundamentally less than. His fear of failure, her feeling of worthlessness. Two sides of the same counterfeit coin. But as he felt her fear for him, her terror that Desmond's words would hurt him, it extinguished his own shame. He straightened to his full height. His eyes shifted, gold bleeding into the amber, and Clara, who was polishing the silver in the next room and could hear every word through the wall, saw nothing. But she heard his voice, and it was the voice of someone who had stopped being afraid. My father taught me that a king's strength is measured by the well-being of his weakest subject, Lazarus said, his words ringing with a conviction he hadn't known he possessed. You see sentiment as a disease, Desmond. I see it as the cure. He turned his back, a deliberate, final dismissal. Through the wall, Clara's hands had gone still on the silver. Her heart was hammering, not with fear, with something she had no name for yet, something that felt like watching a door open that she hadn't known existed. She heard us, his wolf mind noted with deep satisfaction. We were magnificent. She knows it. The silverware knows it. The very walls of this palace know it. We are a legend in progress. The shift happened 3 nights later, and it was not voluntary. Lazarus had been pacing his chambers, Clara's nightmare bleeding through the bond, the plate again, the gold sparrows, except this time the shards were crawling toward her across the floor, when his skin went wrong. Not painful exactly, wrong. The restlessness that had been building for weeks, he hadn't shifted since before the curse, hadn't even thought about it, suddenly became a pressure he couldn't contain. His hands shook, his vision narrowed. The smug, certain part of him, the part that was usually busy admiring their own magnificence, surged forward with an urgency that was not smug at all. Now, it demanded. Now, now, now. He barely made it to the gardens. The shift took him mid-stride, tearing through his shirt, cracking his joints, the world tilting as his perspective dropped to 4 legs. His wolf form was large, dark-furred, built for endurance. He stood in the moonlit garden, panting, the curse's phantom sensations finally muted to a bearable hum. The wolf didn't think in sentences. It thought in certainties. The grass was cold. The moon was right. Somewhere in the east wing, she was safe. That was enough. He didn't know Clara was watching. She'd been unable to sleep, her own restlessness, or maybe an echo of his, and had gone to the window for air. She saw the wolf in the garden. It was enormous, dark as a shadow, moving with a stillness that was not quite animal and not quite human. It lifted its head toward her window, and even from 3 stories up, she could see its eyes. Gold, unmistakable. She pressed a hand to the cold glass. The wolf stood very still, looking up at her. Then it lay down in the grass beneath her window, nose on its paws, and stayed. In the morning, she found a shirt button on the garden path, and a set of claw marks in the soil directly below her window. She picked up the button, put it in her pocket, said nothing. Clara Meadows was not a woman who waited for things to be explained to her. She had felt the bond. She knew the curse existed. She knew the king was suffering, and she knew, because she noticed everything, because noticing was the only power she'd ever had, that the old hedge witch still lived in the lower halls near the scullery, tolerated by the palace for her poultice work. She found the woman on her rest day, grinding something in a mortar that smelled of burnt sugar, the same smell from the corridor, the day of the plate. You did this, Clara said. Not a question. The witch looked up, the same road-map face, the same strange smile. I gave him a window. What he saw through it was his own business. Undo it. Can't. It runs its course in 30 days. Less, now. The witch studied her. Why would you want it undone? He's changed more in a month than his father did in 20 years. Because it isn't fair, Clara said, her voice tight. Not to him. He's carrying my pain on top of his own, and he didn't choose it. The witch tilted her head, bird-like. And what about you? You didn't choose it either. Yet here you are, worrying about the king." Clara said nothing. The witch chuckled, the same dry, rattling sound. "The curse found its way to you because there was already a path, girl. I didn't build the bridge. I just lit the lantern." She turned back to her mortar. 23 days left. What you do with them is your business." Clara left. She did not tell Lazarus, but that afternoon she walked the west corridor and stopped at the loose floorboard. The one that had started everything, the one that had sent the plate flying. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she went to the maintenance closet, found a hammer and a bag of nails, and fixed it herself. It took her 20 minutes. It was imperfect. The nail heads were visible. The board still creaked slightly if you stepped on the left edge. But it held. She stood on it, solid. The first thing she'd fixed for herself instead of waiting for someone else to notice. Lord Desmond's patience ran out on a Tuesday. His public humiliation and Lazarus's soaring popularity had pushed him to the edge. He used his authority to have Clara's quarters searched. A priceless sapphire necklace, family heirloom of the Queen Dowager, was discovered among her things. Clara was brought before the king in the throne room. Desmond and the head of the royal guard presented the evidence. "The Omega Maid is a thief, Your Majesty," Desmond declared, ringing with false piety. "You show them kindness, and this is how they repay you. Their nature is to take." Clara stood very still. Her face was ash white. Through the bond, Lazarus felt her panic, pure, unreasoning terror. And underneath it, rock solid and unyielding, her innocence. The bond didn't lie. Mrs. Croft was there, standing behind her brother, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the middle distance. She would not look at Clara. In 6 years of service, 6 years of docked wages and curdled displeasure, and never once a word of praise, the housekeeper had never once refused to look at her. The refusal now said everything. She knew. She knew this was a lie, and she had chosen her brother. Through the bond, Lazarus felt the specific, surgical pain of that small betrayal land in Clara's chest like a splinter. But Desmond wasn't playing to truth. He was playing to optics. "What do you have to say for yourself, girl?" Desmond demanded. And Clara, to Lazarus's shock, lifted her chin. "I have to say," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "that the necklace was not in my room yesterday when I left for my shift, because I swept every corner of that room myself, and I do not leave corners unswept. I have to say that I have never stolen so much as a sugar cube in 6 years of service, and anyone who has worked beside me will tell you the same." She paused, her hands clenched at her sides, trembling. "And I have to say, my lord, that if you wished to plant evidence, you might have chosen something I could actually have fenced. A sapphire necklace? Where would I sell it? At the market? Yes, hello, I'd like 3 turnips and I'll be paying with a priceless heirloom. Do you have change?" A ripple went through the watching court. Someone suppressed a sound that might have been a laugh. Through the bond, Lazarus felt the cost of those words, the terror beneath them, the way her heart was hammering so hard her vision was blurring. But she'd said them. She had stood in front of the most powerful lord in the kingdom and defended herself, and she had done it with the same devastating precision she used to notice everything. Magnificent, his wolf mind roared, practically vibrating. She is extraordinary. We knew this. We have always known this. The universe confirms what we have been saying all along. Lazarus stepped forward, not to the throne, away from it. He stepped down from the dais and walked until he was standing beside Clara, not in front of her. Not between her and Desmond, beside her. The court went silent. "Lord Desmond," Lazarus said, and his voice was very quiet, which was worse than shouting. "You have presented evidence that a sapphire necklace was found in the quarters of Clara Meadows. I have heard her response." He paused, letting the silence build. "I believe her." "Your Majesty," Desmond began. "I believe her," Lazarus repeated. "Over you, over the evidence, over the Queen Dowager's missing jewelry." He turned to face the full court. Let me be clear about what is happening. I am staking my word, the word of the Alpha King, on the integrity of this woman. If she is a thief, then I am a fool, and you may deal with me accordingly. If she is not— His gaze returned to Desmond, and his eyes, Clara noticed with a sharp intake of breath, had shifted. Not fully, just the edges. The amber was bleeding into gold, the pupils contracting to something that was not quite human. A low sound was building in his chest that she could feel through the floor. Then someone in this room has committed a crime considerably worse than theft. And I will find out who. Clara stared at him. She was standing close enough to see the pulse in his throat, the tension in his jaw. His eyes. Those were not normal eyes. The gold in them was bright and wrong and beautiful, and she catalogued it instantly, filed it alongside every other impossible detail about this impossible man. His eyes change color when he is angry. Not a metaphor, they actually change color. I should be terrified. I am not terrified. This is a separate problem. Desmond's face had gone white. He opened his mouth, closed it, and for the first time in living memory, said nothing. The investigation will be conducted by my beta, Lazarus continued. Gregor Thorne. Not by any party connected to the initial accusation. He looked at Desmond with an expression that made every lord in the room suddenly find their own shoes fascinating. You are dismissed. In the silence that followed Desmond's retreat, Lazarus turned to Clara. The gold was fading from his eyes. The growl had subsided to a vibration she could only feel if she concentrated. He looked exhausted and fierce and real. Are you all right? He asked. Not as a king, as a man. You staked your crown on me, she whispered. Yes. You don't know me. And there it was, the thing that had been sitting between them since the first day, the gap between what the curse had shown him and what she knew he'd seen. He could feel her pulling back, walling herself off, convinced that whatever he thought he knew about her was an illusion. I know you think Lord Bromwell walks like he's being followed by invisible trumpeters, he said quietly. I know you think the Duchess of Everleigh's parlor looks like the inside of a shrimp. I know you can't look at the South Gallery portrait without thinking about the horse's feelings. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I know you count chandelier crystals when you're anxious, and you think the leak in the West Wing is coming from the third floor, and that the cook's assistant should just tell the head gardener already because it's painful to watch. Clara's face went through several colors, none of them found in nature. How? She said, in a voice like someone discovering their diary had been read aloud at a state dinner. There is a curse, he said, and I owe you the truth about it, but not here. He glanced at the watching court. Will you walk with me? He told her in the gardens, all of it, the bond, the emotions, the thoughts. He left nothing out, not the pain he'd felt, not the loneliness, not the observations that had made him laugh alone in his study, not the longing he'd felt from the window. He expected anger, violation, fury at having her innermost thoughts exposed to a man she barely knew. What he got was silence. A long, terrible silence, while Clara sat on a stone bench and stared at the jasmine and processed the fact that the king of the Northern Ridge Pack had been living inside her emotional weather for a month. The horse comment, she finally said. You heard the horse comment. I felt the horse comment. Before the curse. I overheard you in the linen closet 3 weeks before any of this started. Oh no. That's why I was walking the East Corridor. The East Corridor. She turned to look at him. The king was walking past the linen closet because of the horse? Because of the horse. Lord Bromwell's horse. Lord Bromwell's embarrassed horse, yes. She put her face in her hands. Through the bond, still present, still humming between them, he felt a tangle of emotions so complex it took him a moment to parse them. Mortification, disbelief, a fragile, terrified thing that felt like hope. And underneath it all, the sharp, dry voice. He walked the East Corridor because I made a joke about a horse. The king of the Northern Ridge Pack rearranged his daily schedule because of equine commentary. This is either the most romantic thing that has ever happened to anyone, or I am having a very elaborate hallucination brought on by cleaning product fumes. Lazarus waited. You felt everything, she said, not looking up. The hunger, the feet, she swallowed. The window. Yes. And you, the reforms, the food, the hours. That was because of... It started because of you. It continued because it was right. She was quiet again. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and her voice, when it came, was steady and fierce. You had no right, she said, to my thoughts, to my feelings, to the window. No, I didn't. I'm angry. You should be. I am angry, she repeated, and this time her voice wasn't steady. Do you understand what you had? You had every thought I've ever been afraid to think, every humiliation, every time I calculated whether I could afford to eat, every time I looked at something beautiful in this palace and reminded myself it wasn't for me. She was breathing hard. Those were mine. They were the only things I owned. The words landed like stones. Lazarus didn't defend himself, didn't explain, didn't justify. He sat very still and let her be angry, because she had earned it, and because the alternative, smoothing it over, explaining it away, would have been another kind of theft. You're right, he said. All of it. You're right. Don't agree with me. It's infuriating when you agree with me. Would you prefer I argued? I would prefer that you had not spent a month inside my head without asking. I would have asked. I didn't know how. She made a sound, half laugh, half frustrated exhale. You're the king. You could have walked up to me at any point and said, "Excuse me, I appear to be psychically bonded to you. Would you like to discuss it over tea?" I would have been horrified, but at least I would have known. Would you have believed me? She opened her mouth, closed it. Through the bond, he felt the honest answer arrive before she could stop it. No. She would have thought he was mad, or cruel, or both. She would have smiled politely and found a reason to leave and never walked the east corridor again. That's not the point, she said, but quieter now. I know it's not. They sat in the fragile silence. The jasmine swayed. Somewhere in the palace, a clock struck the hour. I am also... She stopped, pressed her lips together. Through the bond, he felt her fighting with herself, the part of her that catalogued and observed and never let her guard down, warring with the part that had stood at a window and wanted. You are also what? He asked very softly. Aware, she said carefully, that you are sitting very close to me and that your eyes are doing the thing again. He blinked. His hand went to his face. The thing? The color thing. When you... She gestured vaguely. They go gold. When you're... I don't know what it means. He knew what it meant. The part of him that was all animal, all instinct, it was looking at her, and it was not interested in being subtle. A low sound had been building in his chest for several minutes, something between a hum and a vibration, and he could tell by the way Clara's gaze flickered to his throat that she could hear it. Tell her it means we are extraordinary, his wolf mind suggested. Tell her we are the finest specimen of our kind, and that our eyes change color because even our biology is dramatic and impressive. It means I feel strongly about something, Lazarus said. About the jasmine? Clara. She met his eyes. He watched her notice the gold, catalog it, file it. The sound in his chest deepened. She didn't flinch. She tilted her head, studying him with the same devastating precision she applied to everything, the same way she'd noticed the Archduke's nostril hair and the Duchess's unfortunate color scheme. Except now she was turning that attention on the things she'd been refusing to look at directly for weeks. Your eyes, she said slowly. The sound you're making. The way you... She gestured at his hands, which had moved toward her without his permission, and stopped 6 inches away, hovering. Is that the wolf? That's me, he said. All of it is me. She looked at his hovering hands for a long moment, Then she reached out and pushed them gently back toward him. Not rejecting, just not yet. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. I need time. Take all of it." The final day of the curse arrived with Desmond's last desperate gambit. The steam began hissing from grates in the corridors, sulfur and ozone. The temperature climbed. Desmond had accessed the hot springs network beneath the castle, amplifying the curse's final energy to overload it, not to sever the bond, but to make it permanent, to shatter Lazarus's mind with amplified emotion until his sanity broke. In her room, Clara felt it. Her knowledge of the castle wasn't academic, it was physical. She knew its groans and sighs. The hot spring system was volatile. Something was wrong. In the throne room, Lazarus felt the curse twist into a weapon. Every flicker of Clara's anxiety amplified into a tidal wave. The smugness in his wolf mind, the part that had never once doubted, never once wavered, that had catalogued Clara as magnificent from the first moment and simply waited for reality to catch up, went silent. Not afraid, not uncertain, just gone. As if a frequency he'd been tuned to his entire life had dropped out. He collapsed to his knees, alone in his own head for the first time in his life, drowning in amplified pain. It was Gregor's pixie situation that cracked the crisis open. He was in the lower levels checking his pixie-proof display case when he saw Desmond chanting over the main cistern, a glowing crystal in hand. A bold pixie, drawn by the shiny object, snatched it and vanished down a maintenance tunnel, giggling. Gregor raced to the throne room. "Lazarus! It's Desmond! The cisterns!" Through the pain, one clear thought pierced the roaring. Not his. Clara's. The pressure release valve. Behind the tapestry of the first hunt, it will vent the excess energy. "Find Clara," he gasped. Gregor found her already in the corridor, moving fast, her face pale but set with a focus he recognized from wolves twice her size. She hadn't been summoned. She'd felt the castle shift, felt the temperature climb, heard the groan of the pipes in the walls, and she'd already been heading for the lower levels. "The king needs you," Gregor said. "The king needs the valve behind the first hunt tapestry," Clara corrected, not slowing down. "Come on, it's rusted. I'll need your arms." She led him through a maze of back passages, servants' shortcuts, maintenance tunnels, a narrow staircase behind the kitchens that smelled of damp stone and old grease. She moved with the certainty of someone who had cleaned every inch of this castle and knew its body better than anyone alive. The walls were hot to the touch. Steam hissed from joints in the pipes overhead. A normal person would have hesitated. Clara did not hesitate. She had spent 6 years learning every groan and sigh of this building, and she was not about to let it shake itself apart because a lord with a grudge and a shiny crystal had decided to play with forces he didn't understand. This is it, she thought, ripping down the ancient tapestry with both hands. This is what comes of men having access to magical artifacts and no access to common sense. The cistern system has a maintenance schedule. There is a ledger. No one has checked it since the old king died. I have been saying this for 2 years, but no one listens to the woman with the mop. The wheel was massive, rusted, and furious about being disturbed. Clara grabbed one side, Gregor the other. They pulled. It didn't move. "Harder," Clara said through gritted teeth. Her arms were shaking. She was an omega, the smallest kind of wolf, and this wheel was designed for engineers with leverage tools. She braced her foot against the wall, adjusted her grip, and pulled with everything she had. Nothing. The castle groaned around them. Plaster dust fell from the ceiling. They were running out of time. Clara let go of the wheel. Gregor looked at her in alarm. "What are you—" "Turn around," she said. "What?" "Turn around, Beta Thorn." Gregor turned around. He heard the rip of fabric, then a sound like joints cracking in quick succession, and then something small and fast pushed past his legs. He looked down. The wolf at his feet was barely knee-height, dark brown, compact, built for speed rather than strength. She was the smallest wolf Gregor had seen in years, and she was already moving, darting beneath the wheel where human arms couldn't reach, finding the rusted mechanism's weak point with an animal certainty that had nothing to do with thinking, and everything to do with knowing. She braced her paws against the wall, got her shoulder under the lowest spoke of the wheel, and pushed. A high, furious sound came from her, not a growl, closer to the determined whine of a creature who refused, absolutely refused, to let a piece of rusted metal win. Gregor grabbed the top of the wheel. Between his arms and her leverage from below, it screamed, then moved. An inch. 2. Then it gave, and a torrent of superheated magical steam erupted into the sealed ventilation shaft with a roar that shook the castle to its foundations. When the air cleared, Clara was human again, sitting against the wall in the remains of her maid's uniform, which had not survived the shift. Gregor, without a word, took off his outer coat and held it out behind him without looking. She took it. "Thank you," she said, wrapping it around herself. Her voice was slightly raw, the disorientation of shifting back, the world still settling into human edges. She hadn't shifted in months, maybe longer. It felt like stretching a muscle she'd forgotten she had. "Well," Gregor panted, leaning against the wall. "That was on the maintenance schedule," Clara said. "Third Tuesday of every month, page 47 of the facilities ledger. Filed under things that will explode if ignored." In the throne room, the pressure vanished. The curse frayed and dissolved. Thread by thread, the connection to Clara snapped away. The last thing he felt from her was relief. And underneath it, one final observation, dry as dust. "I just saved the kingdom in a maid's uniform. They had better not ask me to clean this up." Then silence. The sudden emptiness was cavernous. He couldn't feel her, didn't know if she was safe. The silence was the most profound loneliness he had ever known. Worse than before the curse, because now he knew exactly what he was missing. "Well," said a familiar voice in the back of his mind, returning with the languid ease of someone who had merely stepped out for air. "That was unpleasant, but we endured because we are—" "Not now," Lazarus whispered. "Extraordinary. We are extraordinary. And she is coming." Clara entered the throne room, not in her maid's uniform, in Gregor's oversized beta coat, her hair wild, her feet bare, smelling of steam and rust and wolf. She looked at him across the length of the room, and he looked at her, and for the first time there was no bond between them, no curse, no magical conduit carrying her feelings to him. He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopped in front of her. His hands came up and hovered, not touching, asking. "The bond is gone," he said. "I know. I can't feel what you feel anymore. I know. So I'm asking instead of knowing." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "Are you all right?" She looked at his hovering hands, reached up and took one, placed it against her cheek, her fingers over his. The contact was electric, no magic, just skin. "I'm all right," she said, "and I'm still angry, and I still need time." She paused. "But I would not be opposed to you walking the East Corridor occasionally." "She has given us permission to walk a corridor," his wolf mind announced, as if receiving a military commendation. "This is, obviously, the greatest honor ever bestowed upon a living being. We will walk it with the dignity it deserves." "I can do that," Lazarus said. She almost smiled. It was the closest he'd seen to her real smile. Not the polite one she wore for Mrs. Croft, but the one that lived behind her eyes when she was thinking something devastating about someone's curtains. "Your eyes are doing the thing," she said. "I know. Gold. I know. Is it always going to do that?" He could have lied. He could have been smooth or regal or composed. Instead, the part of him that had never been uncertain about anything in its entire existence, the part that thought it was a legend, that narrated its own life in the third person, that had decided Clara Meadows was the single most important thing in any room from the very first second, that part answered for him, rising through his chest and into his voice with absolute, unshakable conviction. "When I'm looking at you? Yes." She did smile then. A real one. Small, but real. "That's going to be a problem," she said. "People will talk. Let them." Desmond was apprehended in a deep cellar, furiously trying to negotiate the return of his magic crystal from a pixie who wanted a thimble of honey and 2 shiny buttons. His grand plot ended in a sticky, undignified negotiation. Gregor, who had spent weeks losing medals to the tiny creatures, watched with the exhausted satisfaction of a man who had finally found someone the pixies liked less than him. Weeks later, Clara was no longer a maid. She was an advisor to the king. Some called her that. Others called her the king's companion. She had a suite of rooms with books and comfortable chairs, and a window facing the sunrise. One morning, walking to the library, she stopped in the west corridor. The loose floorboard, the one she'd hammered down herself with visible nails and a slight creak on the left edge, was gone. In its place was a new plank of oak, seamless with the old wood around it. Perfectly fitted, professionally done. But on the surface, burned into the grain with the careful hand of someone who had clearly never used a wood-burning tool before and had probably singed his own fingers, was a tiny, unmistakable horse. She stood on it for a long time. Then she walked to the king's study, opened the door without knocking, and said, "The horse is a nice touch." Lazarus looked up from his paperwork. "I don't know what you mean." "The horse, on the floorboard, in the west corridor." "I have no knowledge of any horse on any floorboard." "Your right thumb has a burn mark on it." He looked at his thumb, looked at her. His eyes were doing the thing. "It's a good horse," she said, and then she smiled, a real one, and sat down across from him and pulled his paperwork toward her, and that was how she became his advisor. Not by appointment, by arrival. She was helping him draft a new charter for a kingdom-wide guild system, her sharp, practical mind a perfect foil to his grand vision. She had not fully forgiven him. She might never fully forgive him for the invasion of her thoughts. But she had chosen to be here, and she had done it with her eyes open and her chin up, because Clara Meadows did not drift into things. She walked. They were in the study, papers everywhere, arguing cheerfully about apprentice wages. "You can't set the minimum at 12 silver, she said, not looking up from her calculations. "The provincial guilds will revolt." 11, with a review clause after 6 months. 12, he said. "It's the right number." 11.5, final offer. "You're negotiating with the king." "I'm negotiating with a man who once ate an entire tin of sugared sparrow biscuits in one sitting because he thought it would help." It did help. It gave you a stomachache that I also felt, which was a level of intimacy neither of us had consented to. He grinned. She did not grin back, but her mouth did something complicated that was better than a grin. Gregor burst in, not panicked, just resigned. "Your Majesty, it's the pixies again." Lazarus looked up. "What did they take, Gregor?" "Your crown." They looked at the velvet cushion by the door. Empty. A faint trail of glitter led to the open window. Lazarus and Clara looked at each other. "The crown is gone," his wolf mind observed, absolutely delighted. "It has been liberated by tiny winged criminals. This is the funniest thing that has ever happened. We will tell this story for centuries. Our legend grows." Clara spoke first. "The crown," she said deadpan. "Stolen. By pixies." "It appears so. The crown of the Northern Ridge Pack. The symbol of your sovereign authority over the mightiest territory on the continent." "That's the one." "And it's currently being carried away by creatures the size of your thumb. In fairness, they're very determined creatures." She looked at him with the expression she reserved for life's most spectacular absurdities. The expression she'd never shown anyone. The one she kept locked behind her eyes. The one that saw everything and said nothing. And for the first time in her life, she let it out. "The horse would be so embarrassed," she said, and Lazarus, the Alpha King, threw his head back and laughed. Clara leaned against him, her shoulders shaking, and the sound of them laughing together filled the room and spilled out into the corridor, where 2 passing servants heard it and smiled at each other and said nothing. Because some things didn't need explaining. The kingdom was safe. The people were cared for. The king's crown had been stolen by a creature who would probably trade it for jam. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was home.